VAR? Can you give us an update?
Yeah, it's
and he let
He's
a
winning
pin. What is he doing?
Wait till you see the final move of this incredible game between Anish Giri and Magnus Carlsen. I mean, Yasser was having a breakdown there just watching this thing. And there's also a moment part way through, you just got to see to believe it, right? So here we see e4 on the board from Anish Giri. This is the Superbet Blitz portion of the tournament, by the way. It's about round 7 or something, day 1. Magnus in response goes c5. They've got 5 minutes on the clock, 2 seconds a move, by the way. Knight f3, knight c6, and bishop b5 is the Rossolimo variation. And now Magnus goes for a very offbeat move. Like the main ones here are g6 or e6, standard looking stuff, but he goes pawn e5. Really weird and kind of ugly looking pawn structure. Also begs the question, can't you just literally win a pawn? Well, queen d4 is how you can win it back. Standard kind of idea in the king's pawn openings as well, if white ever exchanges here, you know, in the Roy Lopez stuff. So we get castles played instead. And now another weird move from Magnus. He goes bishop d6. What's all that about? Well, it's actually the top engine move, and although that bishop is a bit of a big pawn right now, well, it defends some stuff, and if ever you see a capture here, the bishop will get opened up. But later on it slides back, you know, it kind of underdevelops. So d3 now played by Giri. You can go c3 there, prepare d4 in 1. There's even d4, a really weird line, just trying to open the d file at the cost of a pawn, get a huge grip on d5. I've analysed one of those games before. But d3 from Giri, knight f6 from Magnus, and now I'm going to whiz through the next few moves because we get a kind of position here that resembles a Guccio piano, probably butchered that pronunciation, or Italian game. So the bishop comes back to c4 here. We get bishop f8, knight d5, d6, c3, and bishop e6. So very much a kind of king's pawn structure. Now I know the pawn is here, like you see in the classic Sicilian, although oftentimes in the king's pawn game, the knight moves, then you push the c pawn. So there's those themes going on in the position. So rook e1 now from Giri. We get a6 from Magnus, looking for some queenside expansion in future. And now bishop d2 prepares b4, and after rook b8, that's exactly what Giri does. Now you don't really want to let this pawn just kick on unopposed. So the top move here is either b5 or takes on b4 as Magnus does, also a good move. But after the recaptures, what he should do here as the top move is pawn b5. Instead, he takes on d5, but this isn't good. Now you don't recapture with the bishop, instead you recapture with the pawn. Because now when the knight drops back, well, these knights are kind of stumbling around a bit on top of each other, and the pawn is already defended here, so you can already crack on with your queenside push. Now the reason, by the way, Giri didn't start with b5 is that now that the knight has removed from c6, it's not attacked, and black therefore has this option to close things down. And you can get some kind of structure like this where actually black can fight for the c file, plus the rock solid c5 square is going to become an outpost, and this pawn's controlling the d4 push. So okay, no b5, Giri starts with a5, good move, preparing b5. And now queen d7 keeps an eye on that one, and we get queen b3, preparing the push once again. By the way, the reason the black knights could never take this pawn earlier is because of this queen b3 move. Then once the knight moves, there's problems on the f7 pawn behind. So we get rook e to c8 now played. Hitting the open file, you couldn't prevent b5, which Giri now does. We get takes on b5, bishop recaptures, and queen d8. So it's an opening success for Giri. Look at the space he's got, look at the queenside pressure, Magnus very passive. So rook a to b1 was now played. Bishop e3, also a good move. But Giri does it in this order. Magnus goes knight f5 to stop bishop e3, and so g4 kicks away the knight. It drops back to e7. By the way, not d4. This is a bad pawn structure. That one's very weak and likely to drop soon. So instead it comes back, but at least you've induced g4, possibly a future weakness. You know, you could get access to this square now. and bishop c4 from Giri nudges back to cover this pawn a bit more, but also opens the b file for pressure here. So knight g6 looks at these weakened dark squares. Queen b6 now from Giri, so he's looking to trade and just sit on the position, try and win this pawn one day. So rook c7 from Magnus, he doesn't swap the queens, he wants to keep attacking chances alive, and now a6 from Giri is a great lever to rip open the position, because when this one nudged up, you do then have this opportunity to push on, and there's no takes or you're losing your rook due to this pin. So instead Magnus, in this position, he plays knight d7, kicks back the queen, but now he's got a double problem. You want to move this rook back in order not to run into the bishop a5 skewer, but then the pawn drops here and you're in a world of pain. So instead, Magnus takes, he allows this skewer, but he wants counterplay on the dark squares. Now he should start with knight f4. Instead, he starts with knight c5. Why is this bad? Well, it runs straight into pawn to d4, and you're basically forced to take because you can't retreat this knight, or else then the pawn takes here, starts ripping everything open, everything collapses for black, and after this one, knight comes in. Well, you can see the power now of the centralized white knight also looking at c6. So this is why Magnus was imprecise, and his time is getting so low now, as we can see. So we get takes on b1, the rook recaptures, and now check out this clip for just how low Magnus's clock gets.
5 seconds.
5,
Oh,
4.
I think he forgot about clock.
So literally, how does he make this move in time? I mean, it wasn't just down to a second, it must have been down to almost 0.2 of a second off going to 0, but he just gets it in. We see captures on c7, the queen recaptures. Giri has 48 seconds to Magnus's 4. This next part of the game is incredible. So the bishop is eyeballed, undefended, Giri drops it back to f1, and Magnus goes a5, so he gets that one running. We see queen e8 now from Giri. He burns 20 seconds on this. It is a good move though, because after a4, we get rook b8, threatening some nasty stuff down here, knight d7 from Magnus to come back and look to defend, and rook c8 kicks out the queen. Now technically best was queen b7 here, because you keep an eye on this e7 checking square in some lines. But queen b6 played, and now you're in trouble. Now there's some amazing lines here with knight c6, knight e6, they're the top two moves. But this one is still decent, even though it's called a miss. And Magnus's only defensive move here was knight e to g5 to try and protect this f7 pawn. But he goes knight f6, really natural looking move to kick that queen. But Giri now has mate in 14, the computer's telling me, if he finds knight e7 check, but he misses it. Now what's the problem with this for black? Well, if you take with the knight, then the queen takes here, you've just left the protection, and the bishop joins the party, it leads to checkmate, something like this. You have to start literally giving pieces. And if instead, after knight e7 check, well, you can't take with the bishop, sorry, you move the king, let's say king h7, well, now here's the other problem, the queen takes on f7. And again, it's all about this bishop joining the attack. So if you take with the bishop here, then there's bishop d3. Everything's falling apart. If you take with the knight, then again there's bishop d3. Still everything's falling apart. This is one sample line. And I think this is why Giri missed it, because you have to see that this bishop joins the attack. But what happens in the game? Giri takes the pawn on a4, stops the counterplay. He's still better, but now Magnus comes back into it. So queen b1 pins the f1 bishop, maybe looks at knight e4 in the future, and so queen d4 centralizes and also sets a sneaky trap. Because if you hop with knight e4, you're literally walking into mate in 1. That bishop is pinned. Now that would be beautiful. So instead, Magnus unpins the king. He allows the bishop to defend this square, also activate in future. We see rook a8 from Giri, so potentially coming around to the back rank to kick out the black queen. And now this knight centralizes powerfully, threatening to skewer the king and queen, or not skewer, fork, sorry. So Giri goes rook a3 to cover, and now g6 from Magnus. The knight drops, bishop g7. He's starting to consolidate. Look at this dark squared kind of combination. You know, anything can happen here. So queen a1 from Giri. He wants to get queens off, play an endgame and exchange up. Magnus is having none of it. He drops back, pressures the d-pawn. Great move, also x-raying this diagonal. So queen a2 now played to cover the pawn. And if you take with the queen, well, the queens come off. Again, you don't want to play an endgame, the exchange down. And if you take with the knight, then there's bishop g2. Problems for Magnus. So instead, he doesn't take, he goes queen b6. Great intuition. Looking to come to c5 or d4, then pressure the pawn like that. We see rook e3 from Giri, so perhaps threatening knight e4, but queen d4. Suddenly Magnus is the centralized queen on d4. Just amazing how this game switches. So queen e2 from Giri, again looking at the knight e4 hop. By the way, knight e2 was his best move to kick that queen out of there, or if the queen took, you know, exchange, again play an endgame and exchange up. But this is a problem, because now, after what Giri played, queen e2, Magnus picks up the pawn with tempo against the rook, and it's a really tough position to play. Because, you know, if the rook starts moving away, which it can do, then there's all sorts of threats as well coming in here. Very tough position. So we see rook e4, it comes this way, the queen goes, and now bishop g2 from Giri allows knight c3, forking these two pieces. But it was very tough to play. Bishop g2 was actually one of the top 3 moves, and this position should be level. Say Giri plays something normal like queen d2, this one comes off, okay, game goes on. Black is a pawn ahead, but there's a lot of pressure on this one. But what do we see in the game? Giri goes queen a2, a Botez gambit. Now, if you don't know what that one is, well, you're seeing it right here. It's where you give away your queen, right? And Giri, this is his reaction. I mean, look at this.
VAR, can you give us an update?
Yeah, it's
Oh, and he let
He's
a
winning
pin. What is he doing?
Oh, my goodness.
Anish.
Anish blundered the queen.
Oh my God.
So one of those shocking things where you just kind of feel embarrassed, right, as a super GM blundering your queen. But anything can happen in Blitz, especially when you're playing the former world champion Magnus. I hope you enjoyed this video. To see another incredible game, check out the video on screen, and thanks very much for watching.